Now we're going to pivot, bringing in Alyson Esposito and Jesse Elliot with Cash in Northwest Arkansas. We are so happy to have you guys. Many folks watching today's program know both these people very well. And this is a really exciting, pivot point because, again, the Seattle folks, everybody's dealing with a lot of tricky stuff right now, but what we really want to focus on for our second half hour are some kind of more visionary, big picture infrastructure building things that they've been helping activate in Northwest Arkansas. And Alyson, I'm not sure if if you stepped away or you're still with us. To be back in a moment. But Jesse, how are you doing down there?
Well, perhaps appropriately, it's been a very Seattle-y week here, and I just want to first of all just shout out. Seattle is probably if not certainly one of the few biggest influences on my life, personally, creatively, professionally. I mean, truly, that entire scene created a lot of the music that brought me to music in the first place, and not just of a particular time period that people sometimes romanticize, but really throughout the decades. I mean, Seattle was always, both of the bands that I was in, it was our favorite place to tour, and it was from the tiny little tractor taverns all the way up to the big rooms and outdoor amphitheaters, and like that ecosystem is just such a beautiful place. So that's just, I don't know, a really deep, sincere thanks and to all of you doing amazing work in that scene that's been so important to like world music history and still is really vital. And Kate Becker, who we all know and love, worth shouting out that she has been a real hero of all of ours in Colorado when I was working there, but also here in Arkansas, where Northwest Arkansas is one of the 2021 Revs cohort regions. And Kate has already had a huge impact on some of the Zoom convenings that we've thrown for our local venues as we've tried to work through all these questions that Shannon and Scott and Kitty were bringing up today. Kate, as with lots of us, I'm sure, has been just really incredibly important in helping us to rethink how we're entering this crazy new era. It's hard to picture two more different geographies than Seattle and Northwest Arkansas, although there's a lot more in common than you'd think. You'd be surprised. I really appreciate Music Policy Forum for that reason. I think it's this cool mixtape that we all get to participate in. And this is like the hour of the week that I most look forward to every week. Whether I know what's going to happen or not, I know I can just like tune in and there's going to be some interesting geographies.
No, stop it, Jesse, stop it. So
but I mean it. I don't know if it's like the Seattle rain outside today or what, but I was getting kind of emotional. I was like, this is so cool. This is like the closest thing we have to touring. And as those of you who know me know, touring is one of my favorite activities of all time.
It's fun. It's been such a privilege to do this work, do this program. I mean that sincerely, and again, as most of the folks watching know, I've been involved in hosting in-person conferences for over 20 years, and it's going to be fun to get back to in-person. But this is a whole different thing. We can do things with this technology that simply are not possible if you're trying to get someone to go to DC or go to a different, go to Austin or something. And it's really neat that we have this opportunity. So we're going to do a couple of things that are going to be super fun. And again, part of what I love about Alyson, what you and Jesse are building, is that I think that there's an intention not only around, and I should say at the outset, and I know you would say this and emphasize this is not the two of you doing this. This is, connecting with an enormous amount of local resources and, thought leaders and artists and connectors. And so this is not you guys coming in and magically waving your whatever one thing is that just builds creative infrastructure. So, but you're helping support and put some focus to what's happening in Northwest Arkansas. And you're also being extraordinarily generous in terms of what does this mean for other communities and how can this be sort of a laboratory that people can see themselves in it. And I want to start, this is really dumb, but we're going to start with a map. So Alex, do you mind, could you just call up a map real quick? Because again, like many of us in the music community, I've been extremely fortunate to travel a lot in this country. And it's really been hard for me to get my head around what Northwest Arkansas means. We hear it a lot. So why don't you guys talk a little bit about the geography? On the left, you can kind of get a larger sort of scope of where the Northwest Arkansas region fits into other communities. And then On the right is a little bit of a zoom in terms of where your actual studio, Cash Studios, are based.
Yeah, that's right. And I came here most immediately from Colorado, in Denver and in Fort Collins. I was working in those two communities for a while, but before that lived in DC and Mexico City and Copenhagen and other places that are decidedly non-Arkansan. Alyson came here most recently from Boston, but is sort of most well known in the arts philanthropy field for all of the work she did, kind of helping reinvent the arts philanthropy systems of Boston and Chicago. So again, fairly non-Arkansan. I had toured through here for a long time, so I had a sense of it already. But one thing that even when I moved here kind of blew my mind to think about was the day that I discovered that Northwest Arkansas is actually equidistant from New Orleans and Minneapolis. And this is like the one useful factoid that seems to register with people, because most people have some sense, if not where New Orleans and Minneapolis are, at least that they're very different places. And both of them are about 9.5 hours from us, north or south. Sort of pulling it closer in, we're in this like magical little diamond in the Ozark Mountains in the Ozarks that's between Kansas City, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City, Little Rock, and Memphis. So we also have these sort of like 4 amazing creative and music scenes, all known for very different things, right? The music history of Kansas City is very different from the music history of Memphis, is very different from Tulsa's. And we kind of sit right in the middle of that diamond. Most folks, if they know Northwest Arkansas specifically, know Fayetteville, which is a cool college town, University of Arkansas, very cosmopolitan, brings people in from all over the world. If you're in the corporate world, you might know Bentonville as the sort of headquarters. Really, the whole region is the headquarters of 3 of the Fortune 100 companies, Walmart, Tyson, and J.B. Hunt. Those all intermingle. And then I think less people know that it's also this amazing, really diverse melting pot, huge Latinx population, a huge, not huge, but very culturally significant Black population, very culturally significant Indigenous population, and then the largest population in the mainland U.S. of Marshallese folks. When we bombed the islands over there, a lot of the folks who we brought over here relocated to this area. So there's a really rich cultural hotbed. That doesn't even include the kind of Ozark folklore set and all of the stuff that came from Arkansas, whether it's, Sister Rosetta Tharpe or Johnny Cash or more recently, folks like Janae Fleener and others who really affect the country and folk and Americana traditions. Does that give enough context for now? I
think that's great. And on that very bottom right of that last graphic, we don't need to go back to it, Alex, but on the very bottom right, you would see Hot Springs, which we need to call out as a hometown for our MPF co-founder and legendary troublemaker, Ashley Keaton. So got that as well. So Alyson, when did you arrive in town in Northwest Arkansas?
Yeah. I've been here for almost 2 years, but really, 6 months before the pandemic to found and start up this intermediary organization. And so have been doing most of that, in the social justice movement of our time and in the pandemic, therefore really trying to look at what does it mean to create a new arts service organization, arts council? What are the systems that we want to build from scratch? What are the best practices that we need to upend? All those kinds of things. So yeah, just 2 years.
So let's start big picture on what is Cash. Let's just start. I don't know anything. So let's just start at the beginning. What do I need to know? What do we need to know? I don't. I was role playing there, Jesse. I know a bunch, but
I'm going to frame one thing of sort of where we're at, and then Alyson, who is our most esteemed executive director, Kate. I can't move to Seattle just yet. She's on this Zoom call. I need to stick around and work hard here. But just to frame it, we really are at this sort of nascent point of the organization. Alyson's been here the longest for 18 months. The rest of us have joined in last year. There's 15 folks on our team. We're about to complete our first strategic planning process, like literally in the next month. So, and even a lot of the stuff that we're going to say on this short little Zoom here will be just between us chickens, as my grandma Bonnie used to say, until we sort of announce stuff publicly. But you're all our close friends and peers, so we wanted to dump some of it out and really to use this as an invitation to collaborate. A lot of the stuff that we're thinking about because we're realistic about where we are in the literal and figurative scale of things and the map of things. A lot of what Alyson and I feel passionate about is getting our amazing local communities to collaborate and exchange. So CASH actually means Creative Arkansas Community Hub and Exchange. That's the E in CASH, and that E is very important for us. We want to do a lot of collaborating. We already have been doing a lot of collaborating with other places. And so we agreed with Michael to come on here, even though it's sort of like early in our process, because we wanted this to be our kind of crew, one of our crews that we could potentially collaborate on some interesting touring programs and artist residency stuff and disaster recovery stuff. It was so good to see Matt on here again. There's so many different ways I think that we can hook into these networks and hopefully help out you all. So that's our invitation. Alyson, tell us who we are.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. I think really we're an intermediate organization, and we have these sort of two halves of this region that we're trying to connect. One is this incredible surplus of resources, right? We have the Waltons here. We have, these big business leaders that have been here for decades that are really excited to invest in arts, culture, and creativity in a different and more strategic way, and are at sort of the cusp of figuring that out. And then we have this rich, diverse creative community that has been here that Jesse was talking about, that really has not seen that investment. And so primarily through what we now have, our 26 initiatives, we are trying to connect those two halves of our communities and sort of sitting in the middle there. And I would say that, that looks like spaces. We're standing up the first collaborative spaces that we have, seen in the region to bring folks together. It looks like municipal cultural planning and policymaking. It looks like music ecosystems work, music here. There's a critical mass of musicians. We just completed our first study. We've sort of been like, who the heck is here? Everyone wave your flag. Let's figure it all out. And have been blown away by just the sheer numbers. But music is very richly present. And so, we're going to be doing a lot in that space. And of course, that's why we grabbed Jesse and got him over here, for many other reasons. We're looking at arts and culture and creativity really broadly. We're focused on the nonprofit sector, but also individual artists, also the creative industries, and really, don't care what discipline you're working in, supporting everybody from tattoo artists to those that have formal training in a visual art form, and et cetera. And I would just say, we're really working to connect 5 disparate and very unique communities that have sort of regional turf wars that go on a little bit, where, one side doesn't want to go to the other. And the way that Jesse and I see it is just that, really, if you look at it all and you sort of step back as a region, the MSA is about 650,000 people. It's expected to double within 3 to 5 years, right? So it's a bonkers scenario of growth. And so we're trying to knit them all together, really, and get folks to collaborate and connect differently. We think that we have nearly everything that we need here locally if folks can start working together differently. So that's a big part of our mission right now.
And
is
the growth anticipated? This is, again, I'm asking like trillion for questions today, so I apologize, but is there a sense that the growth is sort of organic, that for a bunch of geographic and other reasons, housing prices and other communities, other things, that there's anticipated that's going to happen? Or is that part of a strategy where basically the city leader or community leaders in the region are like, we actually want to grow, like we're going to hit the gas, we want people to come, we want to scale?
All of the above. I would say it's really led by the large corporations that are here, that are designing and creating, new giant scale work centers and so forth, and are very focused on talent attraction. But also, it's a great place to live. We keep getting that designation in terms of quality of life in all the various publications. And so I
really think more in like an analogy I think more folks on this call will know is this place is really like what Colorado was looking like 10 or 15 years ago. It's a serious combination of like it's called the natural state, right? Arkansas is, and that's not just a euphemism. It is a really beautiful, beautiful place when it comes to nature. I mean, the Ozarks are just like majestic and mysterious and weird and full of mystical creative powers. And I think that combined with the low cost of living, it's the same as the Colorado story, 10 or 15 years ago, which has changed now quite a bit. And then combined with the sort of talent attraction thing, which is, from those types of companies. I think one of our big challenges is how do we balance that desire for growth with also, like all of us on this call, having seen the intensely fast gentrification curve that gets out of everybody's control before you can do anything about it. We feel like we're at this cusp moment where if we don't start building in things like more affordable housing, not just for artists and creatives, although of course that's our sort of central thing, but just more affordable life in general. If we don't do that now, this region, what'll happen with this region is what's happened with the Front Range in the last few years in Denver and Boulder and whatnot. So it's all those.
So something that's been a really interesting dynamic to watch during the shutdown is sort of the elevation of stuff that many of us have been navigating for a long time, which is the sort of tension between, kind of public sector, nonprofit art sector, commercial sector. Who feels responsibility for these different sectors? What does that mean in terms of policy or funding, or particularly public funding? Now, Jesse, of course, you were deeply involved in the creation of the Colorado Music Strategy, which is really one of the nation's first, and I would argue leading efforts, for the state arts agency to kind of engage around understanding and trying to support the creative economy, not just the nonprofit sector. Yeah. Alyson, you've been in local art agency world and been thinking about how that needs to shift or have maybe different thinking or, kind of evolving thinking. So could you speak a little bit about where cash fits sort of in terms of org chart land, in terms of like the entities that are behind it or kind of where it's incubated?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're wanting to think about diverse funding and support streams like anybody else. There is a huge lack of public funding in Arkansas. It's one of the poorest per capita, arts funded states in the country. What'd you say?
At a state level, sorry.
At a state level, we're working closely with all the municipalities who actually have done a pretty good job, because Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art was built here about a decade ago to national and global significance. Honestly, it's free. 77% of the state goes. It's beautiful. It's pretty extraordinary. Folks already understand. There's this sort of deep understanding that why arts and culture are important for economic development, for tourism, for all the things that folks are thinking about. And so the public funding has followed from a local and municipal level to some extent, although I would say we're working on strategy there. But yeah, we basically are funded by the large businesses that are here, the large families that are here, and we have contracts with many municipalities and many public spaces that are looking for the first time to think about programming and what it means to do that sort of with diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How are things in the region? Like, again, we talk a lot about, again, to use Seattle as an example, just because they're on with us today, the importance of having the local curators and connectors. So The Stranger was mentioned as a local weekly. Of course, we know KXP. We know that there's sort of a whole infrastructure of people who have jobs and are passionate to talk about the local culture, to promote it, to create context around it. Is that infrastructure exist in your region? I imagine the university houses some of that. Is that stuff that you're looking at in terms of trying to help support, or does that really need to be more of an organic thing?
Yeah, but both again. I think it's one of those misconceptions that we all carry around, that because this is a quote unquote red state, although trending purple, and the counties that we live in are sort of purple trending blue, that kind of stuff wouldn't exist. But I think anybody who's lived in a smaller town or maybe somewhere off the beaten path a little bit more knows that there are actually a fairly diverse set of humans that live almost anywhere. Like, that creativity is kind of an inherent thing that just sort of bubbles up from all of us. And so you have all these little groups that sort of naturally form. So we have all the sort of alt weeklies and cool radio stations and NPR stations. And I think there's a lot of different levels. I would say what it's most known for is those kind of very high level institutions like the Crystal Bridges and the Momentary type of crowd. But then of course it's got sort of like the upper middle class, symphonies and ballet groups and things like that. I think we're really trying to foster more of the diverse, organic, grassroots, again, individual artists, mom and pop for-profits, like Alyson said, whether it's a tattoo shop or a food truck or that is from the Latinx or Marshallese community, or some cool new creative business that somebody had an idea for. That's really the stuff that we're trying to grow more, just because it hasn't had institutional support in the past. But it's all here. It just needs a little more, TLC.
And Alyson, when you mentioned earlier 5 communities, you meant literally different cities, literally communities, not sort of metaphorically different sectors.
Yeah, we're working at the regional level. And so, there's a few efforts that are being invested in at this regional level where they're really like, okay, let's just pull up and pull back and try and get everybody to play. And so, to Jesse's point, one of the communities is almost 50% Latinx, and there's really amazing, grassroots vibe going on and house hip hop shows every night and that kind of thing. And then adjacent to that is the very sort of fancy upper crust high art thing going on. And so it's really just how do we get all of it to blend together from a resource sort of equitable distribution standpoint, but also like audiences and there being a scene. So yeah, all of it.
It's been so great to get to know a lot of your folks through the Reds Initiative. And can you speak a little bit to your vision for reopening and what to expect in the second half of this year and kind of what that means to springboard into 22?
It's an interesting one, especially in this group, because it occurs to me, even as I was sort of listening to the Seattle group talk, there are all these advantages and disadvantages that come with different cultural stews, right? And one of the advantages to being in this weird purpley place that has people from all over the political map, whether conscientious objectors that moved here in the 60s and 70s and set up camp out in the woods and still have cool retreat centers and recording studios and whatever in the Ozarks, up to like the very most sort of stereotypical Trump flag waving neighbors of mine, for instance, and kind of everything in between. One advantage to that weird political mix is that we never fully shut down. It didn't feel like we sort of 65 to 75% shut down, depending on what month you were talking about. And so the reopening conversation it's kind of just been with us in a more everyday way than what it feels like to me in other places that I've been to, where it's like you pull all the way back and then trying to get all the way back forward into it can be quite jolting. I think the word whiplash was what Scott used, which is exactly right. We didn't quite have that combined with, and famously in the beginning, right? Like the New York Times was writing understandably semi-disparaging articles about like the first concert back in Fort Smith, Arkansas and stuff like that, which is just an hour down the road from us. It's just outside of Northwest Arkansas. I think that combined with the fact that it is a very outdoorsy place. And so like a Colorado, there's already a lot of infrastructure that's built in. And by that, I mean like on the ground, every bar, every venue has some kind of outdoor patio. And they were just kind of like, well, let's move stuff outside. Like it's a very pragmatic, immediate thing. Having said that, of course, there were venues that we had to totally shut down and folks who take that very seriously. And as you know, Michael, we're now sort of in the process of having those conversations to open it back up. We were just on a call yesterday with a guy named Eddie Vega, who is the sort of Latinx kingpin, like media mogul of this region for the last like 25 years. And he was caught in this really interesting bind because he has a 3,500 capacity venue that serves 95% Latinx clientele. And of course, with issues of equity and accessibility as far as testing and vaccines and all that go, this was like a major, Eddie was both the hardest hit and also sort of it was like a double whammy. Also the one who like cared most about his very specific community, not getting back into a mix that would be in any way dangerous. So he's been very hesitant, even though as a business owner, as a for-profit creative industries guy his entire life, he's like, I need to get back open and I need to start making this venue sustainable again. He's finally going to do his first show in just about a week now. And so I think that to us is kind of a lot of places have already reopened in the last couple months. And that is going to be a real turning point when Eddie's place and other folks like that start sort of following suit.
I got two more for you real quick. And Alex, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you could call a map up again real quick, I'd really appreciate it, because again, some of the synergies with Seattle, part of what Kate Becker and others have been working on pre-pandemic was the notion of this cascading music corridor that would really try to align strategies, with Seattle, Portland, Boise, up to Anchorage, Vancouver. And I am just struck when you look at that map on the left there, and Tulsa didn't make it on the map, but Tulsa is about 2 hours, right? You got Kansas City, St. Louis, Memphis, Shreveport. I mean, you've got about a quarter?
Tulsa's actually the closest of any of those big cities. It's right where it says Choctaw Nation on the map. Tulsa's just on that yellow interstate line just north of there. So it's only about an hour and 45 minutes away from there.
So you've got pretty remarkable, you're at the center of about a 4 to 5 hour drive.
Yeah.
Or a lot, and also the potential of making a loop there when you're looking at St. Louis, Kansas City, Wichita.
Yeah.
Also Dallas, Metroplex, et cetera. Where are you guys in terms of are you thinking I know you're talking regionally in terms of literally your Arkansas region, but are you also starting to lay the groundwork for more regional touring networks, more regional collaboration, and strategies?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And part of that is just the worlds that Alyson and I come from. We have this sort of DIY independent touring mindset, which is like, you build it in concentric circles. And we have felt like actually a lot of the last year has been a sort of good hunkering down within our region. But at the same time, Alyson and I just got back from a visit to Tulsa, which is kind of a mind-blowingly cool place right now. I mean, Tulsa was cool 15 years ago, but it's really cool now. And Kansas City is the same. We're going to go up there in a couple of weeks and visit with some folks. Interestingly, like one of the common threads, it's not the only common thread, but there are some really progressive family foundations in all of these places that are doing this work. So Kaiser and Tulsa, Kaufman and Kansas City, and then the Waltons and Tysons and other folks here are all, and obviously St. Louis and Memphis has a fair amount of that population as well. So I think we're starting to knit together some of that institutional stuff so that artists can exchange, do different touring programs, residency programs, et cetera. But yeah, that's right on.
And I'm going to end, and thanks, Alex, and take the map down. Again, with a question, Alyson, that may be a little bit more rhetorical. If you don't have an answer, it's okay. It's all good. But, a lot of what we've been talking about over the last, year, I mean, certainly what we've been talking about for years, right? For literally 10, 15 years, it's been accelerated during the shutdown and the transition to the administration, and the success of the Save Our Stages campaign, which again, $16.25 billion more money than has gone to the NEA and NEH combined over a 50-year history. There's this kind of recalibration of what can we be asking the federal government to do in terms of policy and funding resources. And there's a lot of conversation about how sort of local philanthropy can then be, ideally sort of an inspiration to help advocates, reframe the conversation. Is there anything you could speak to from your experience in different communities and working in the arts agency world and now coming down here to Northwest Arkansas, how that can bridge up in a tangible way instead of just throwing money at problems, but like what real investment could look like?
Oh gosh, I mean, this is the $1 million question, right? But I think I'm personally right now working with some folks at the NEA and some folks on a task force to figure out how the next tranche of relief funds can touch the ground a little bit differently, and what that looks like and who the intermediaries are that have access to, I would say, beyond the traditional large nonprofits in the country, right? And so I think there's a lot of work happening right now behind the scenes to figure that out. And it's really interesting because a lot of the best intermediaries across the country that have access to the communities in most need just really haven't been at the table. So I think it's sort of a, again, identification of who's out there that can help to sort of spread that around differently. And then what that will mean for the future of how federal resources are activated, I think is also really fascinating. So I think we're middle of it. We have no answers, but I'm hopeful.
Well, it's exciting to see that, again, and we don't like to talk politics on this program, but to be out of the mindset of having to just justify basic infrastructure like corporate public broadcast, the NEA, and now being a mindset of really trying to be thought partners with policymakers who are saying, basically, we're spending the money. Like the money is going to be spent. HUD is going to spend $68 billion a year. I mean, all these investments are going to be made. And just a willingness to say, what does this mean, not conceptually, but in a very practical way. as we're thinking about housing policies, we're thinking about how we want to reshape our music industry and have a more equitable music industry. We think about digital infrastructure. I mean, I know that Arkansas, like many states, struggles with access to internet and wireless broadband. And how do we, again, think about that not as a luxury, but as a necessity? And how do we take action to make sure people can get on these platforms, either as consumers or to run their business, but also, industry. So there's a lot to it, but we're just so excited that you all are doing the work that you're doing. And we are so appreciative that you're doing it in a way that is, again, community-based. That's what you said earlier. We really take to heart. And we're all excited to come visit y'all. We want to learn what you're doing. We want to see what we can apply to our communities. We're just really, really stoked. So we're over time. I apologize for that. Thank you, Jesse and Alyson, of course. Thank you, Shannon, Kitty, and Scott, as always. Matthew, thank you for jumping in. Alex, great job producing as ever. Again, this show will be archived. Will be up early next week. If you saw something today that you thought was interesting, you want to share with friends, please share the link and get the word out. As always, we welcome and appreciate your feedback, suggestions, questions, ideas, very gently worded constructive criticism. You can always contact us at musicpolicyforum@gmail.com. Have a great rest of your Friday, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.